The radio crackled to life at exactly 3:12 in the morning. The sound was sharp, a jagged blade of electricity cutting through the oppressive silence of the industrial district. Staff Sergeant Daniel Reyes grabbed the headset instantly, his thumb hovering over the push-to-talk button before the second burst of static could wake the rest of the squad. Around him, the air was bitter, a mix of freezing river mist, wet concrete, and the faint, lingering ozone smell of a city that had been shelled for weeks. Command. This is Bravo team. Go ahead. He waited. For 5 seconds, there was only the hollow, rhythmic hiss of an empty channel, like the breathing of a ghost. Then, the voice came through. It wasn't the frantic, high-pitched tone of a green private back at the base, nor the bored, robotic drone of a midnight dispatcher. It was clear. It was calm, and it was terrifyingly familiar. Bravo team, this is Colonel Harris. I have new tactical orders for your position. Prepare to copy. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. His hand tightened around the plastic receiver until his knuckles turned white and his palm began to sweat despite the cold. Because Colonel Harris couldn't be speaking. Not tonight. Not ever again. Exactly 12 hours earlier, Daniel had stood on a scorched, windswept hillside 5 miles from the wire. He had watched with his own eyes as a recovery team pulled a blackened flight helmet and a handful of personal effects from the twisted, smoking wreckage of a downed Black Hawk. There were no survivors. The colonel was gone. Half the battalion had seen the crash, yet here he was. The voice was unmistakable, that low, gravelly authority that had led them through 3 tours of duty. It was speaking directly into Daniel's ear, sounding as alive as if he was standing right behind him in the dark. Bravo team had been inserted into the outskirts of what the boys called the dead zone just before midnight. 6 men, 6 shadows moving through a graveyard of warehouses and rusted machinery. Their mission was simple on paper. Confirm if enemy insurgents were using the industrial sector to stage a dawn ambush against the main armored column. But in this city, nothing was ever simple. The streets were a labyrinth of collapsed brick and jagged rebar. It had been a tomb all week. No stray dogs, no movement, no sound. In Daniel's experience, that kind of silence was never peace. It was just the sound of a fuse burning down toward a powder keg. The squad moved in a tight tactical formation. Broken windows in the factories above rattled in the wind like chattering teeth. Every flickering, dying streetlight felt like a sniper's spotlight. They were 3 blocks away from Main Street, the primary artery that would lead them to their extraction point. Then the radio came alive again. Bravo team, the voice repeated, firmer this time. This is Colonel Harris. Do you copy, Sergeant Reyes? Daniel looked over his shoulder at his squad. In the eerie neon green glow of their night vision goggles, he saw their faces pale. Their eyes were wide, darting toward the radio unit on the RTO's back. They all heard it. Private Miller, the youngest kid in the group, barely 19 and still smelling like base camp laundry, whispered through the coms, his voice cracking, "Sarge, tell me that's a recording. Tell me that's a prank from the guys at Base Alpha." But Daniel knew better. Every soldier in the 3rd Battalion knew that tone. It was a voice that commanded gravity itself. It was the voice of a man who never joked on a live frequency. "Command, confirm identity," Daniel whispered, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and professional discipline. The response was instantaneous, cutting through his doubt like a hot wire. "Reyes, stop wasting time and listen to me. Enemy forces are currently prepping a heavy weapons ambush exactly 3 blocks east of your current heading. They have line of sight on the intersection of Main and 5th. Daniel's stomach dropped into his boots. The voice knew his name. It knew their exact coordinates. Most importantly, it knew the enemy's layout better than the satellite intel they'd been briefed on 2 hours ago. "Do not continue down Main Street," the voice commanded. The authority was absolute. "Turn south immediately. Move through the shipping yard and take the service tunnel. You have 30 seconds before their forward scouts crest the ridge to your left. Move, Sergeant." Daniel looked down the long, straight stretch of Main Street. It was a classic urban kill zone. High windows on both sides, burnt-out cars providing zero cover, and narrow alleyways that would trap them like rats. It was exactly where their mission profile told them to go. "Sarge, what's the call?" Miller asked. He was gripping his rifle so hard the barrel was shaking. Daniel stood on the edge of a choice that would define his life. He could follow the book, ignore an unauthorized transmission from a dead man's frequency, and walk into the unknown. Or he could trust the ghost of the commander who had spent 2 years keeping them alive. The radio barked one last time, sounding impatient now. "Reyes, you're burning daylight. South, now. Bravo team, pivot. South Street, double time. Into the yard," Daniel shouted. They scrambled into the darkness of the shipping yard, boots thudding against the gravel, ducking behind rusted sea containers and stacks of rotting lumber. They moved with a frantic energy, fueled by the kind of adrenaline that only comes from the supernatural. They reached the shadows of a massive crane and waited 10 minutes of heart-pounding silence passed. Daniel checked his watch. The air seemed to grow heavier. Then, the radio erupted. It wasn't the colonel this time. It was the panicked, screaming chaos of Charlie Teemer's sister patrol operating only a half-mile to their east. "Contact. Contact," were pinned. "Main and 5th. They're everywhere, RPGs from the rooftops. We need immediate air support. Man down, man down." The sound of heavy, cyclic machine gun fire washed over the channel, followed by the muffled, thumping roar of a sickening explosion that Daniel could feel in the soles of his boots. Then, the most terrifying sound of all, dead air. The members of Bravo teams stared at each other in the dark. The realization hit them like a physical blow. If they hadn't turned, if Daniel had stuck to the original mission parameters, that would have been their screams on the radio. They would have been the ones trapped in the crossfire of Main and 5th. The dead colonel hadn't just given an order. He had reached out from the grave and physically pulled them out of a slaughterhouse. How did he know? Miller whispered, his breath coming in ragged gasps. How could he possibly know they were there? Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't. He checked the frequency again, his fingers trembling as he adjusted the dials. It was a secure high-tier command channel, encrypted with rolling codes that changed every 6 hours. Only senior officers had the keys. The voice returned. It was colder now, sounding slightly more distant, almost as if it were being transmitted through a long, metallic tunnel. Bravo team, new instructions. An enemy mobile patrol is moving toward the train yard directly north of your position. They are equipped with thermal optics. Stay off the main road. Move through the basement of the abandoned textile factory on your right. Stay low. Do not engage. For the next hour, the night became a choreographed dance with the invisible. Every few minutes, the colonel's voice would cut through the static, providing a roadmap through a minefield. Avoid the loading dock. Wait behind the brick wall for exactly 60 seconds. Move through the maintenance alley instead of the park. And every single time they followed the instructions, they watched from the shadows as the danger passed just feet away. They saw a sniper adjusting his scope on a roof they were supposed to have been under. They watched an enemy Technicolor truck with a mounted heavy machine gun roll silently past a gap in the fence where they would have been standing. The dead commander seemed to be watching the entire city from a godlike perspective, seeing every enemy heartbeat and every hidden barrel. By the time they reached the far edge of the industrial district, Daniel's mind was reeling. He risked a direct, wideband transmission to headquarters. He needed anyone to tell him he wasn't going crazy. "Command, this is Bravo, Team Lead. We are receiving high-level tactical intel and navigation. Orders from Colonel Harris on Channel 7. Confirm his status and authorize his transmissions." There was a long pause. The operator on the other end sounded first confused, then sharply annoyed. "Bravo team, be advised, you are out of line. Colonel Harris was confirmed KIA at 15 o'clock hours yesterday. His remains are currently being processed at base. Alpha, you are to cease using his call sign and return to standard operating procedures." "Who is this?" "We're still receiving his orders, Command." Daniel snapped back, his voice rising in the empty street. "He just saved our lives 3 times in 60 minutes. He's giving us enemy positions in real." The silence that followed on the radio was heavy. Then, a different voice came on the battalion signal officer. "Bravo team, stay put. We're seeing strange activity on your sector's relay. We are tracing the source of your signal now. Hold your position." Back at HQ, the technicians spent 20 minutes in a frenzy, trying to triangulate the ghost broadcast that was bypassing their security firewalls. They finally found the source. It wasn't coming from the morgue at Base Alpha, and it wasn't coming from an enemy hacker. It was coming from 2,000 feet above Bravo team's heads. A damaged MQ-9 surveillance drone was drifting in a slow, erratic, dying orbit across the city. Earlier that morning, that specific drone had been flying top cover for Colonel Harris's helicopter during his final inspection tour. When the Black Hawk was hit, the resulting explosion had sent a massive electromagnetic pulse through the drone's proximity sensors, partially frying its hard drive and its communication arrays. The drone wasn't thinking. It wasn't a ghost in the traditional sense. It was a machine in its death throes. The signal officer explained the technical nightmare over the comms. The drone system had entered what they called a recursive data loop. It was replaying recorded transmissions from the colonel's final tactical briefing meeting he had held at 9 o'clock that morning before he ever boarded the helicopter. During that meeting, the colonel had been standing over a map of the city, outlining his predictions for enemy movements and planning the very mission Bravo team was currently on. The orders Daniel was hearing weren't live commands. They were echoes of a dead man's brilliance. The colonel had spent his final hours on Earth obsessing over the safety of his men, studying the enemy's patterns so closely that he had predicted their ambushes with terrifying accuracy. The drone was simply screaming those last thoughts into the night air on a continuous broken loop. But here was the part that the technicians couldn't explain, the part that still keeps Daniel awake at night. The drone wasn't replaying the briefing in a straight line. It was skipping. It was jumping through hours of audio. It was repeating specific words and phrases out of their original context. By some impossible, 1 in a trillion mathematical fluke, The glitches in the drone's hardware were lining up perfectly with Bravo Team's real-time progress. When the drone's damaged processor skipped and replayed the word stop, Bravo Team happened to be exactly 3 feet away from a hidden pressure plate eyed. When the audio looped the word south, they were at the only intersection that wasn't covered by an enemy heavy machine gun. The machine was broken. It was a piece of junk falling out of the sky. But the man's tactical genius was still reaching through the sparks and the short circuits to protect the soldiers he loved. Just as the signal officer finished his explanation, the radio hissed with a final surge of power. The voice came back. It wasn't calm this time. It was loud, urgent, and distorted by a heavy electronic growl. Bravo Team, stop moving. Enemy unit dead ahead. Take cover. The squad froze as if they had hit a brick wall. Daniel dropped to one knee, signaled for silence, and peered through his thermal optics. His heart nearly stopped. An entire enemy platoon at least 30 men was crossing the street less than 20 yards ahead, moving silently between the shadows of 2 warehouses. If Bravo Team had taken just 2 more steps, the sound of their boots on the gravel or the silhouette of their helmets would have given them away instantly. They were outnumbered 5 to 1. They stayed as still as statues. They watched the heat signatures of the enemy soldiers fade into the distance. They stayed silent. They stayed alive. Moments later, a final text burst appeared on Daniel's tactical tablet from HQ. The drone's battery has reached 0%. It is deorbiting now. Signal terminated. The radio hissed one last time. There was no static, no distortion, just a final, clear fragment of audio from the colonel's morning briefing. It was soft, almost a sigh of relief, as if the man knew his work was finally done. Bravo Team. Mission complete. Bring him home. Then came the silence. The kind of absolute, heavy silence that only exists when the wind stops blowing in a dead city. The transmission never returned. At sunrise, 6 soldiers walked through the gates of Bas Alpha. They were exhausted, covered in the dust of the industrial district and smelling of fear. But they were alive. They were the only patrol from that sector that returned without a single casualty. Daniel removed his helmet, feeling the weight of the night pressing down on his shoulders. He sat on the bumper of a transport truck, watching the sun crest over the horizon. Private Miller sat next to him, staring up at the empty blue sky where the drone had finally fallen and burned up in the atmosphere. "Do you really believe it, Sarge?" Miller asked quietly. "Do you really think it was just a glitch? Just a broken machine repeating a recording at the right time?" Daniel looked at the horizon, thinking about the precision of the warnings. He thought about the way the voice had sounded not like a loop, but like a man who was still watching over them, still caring, still leading. He thought about those final words. "Bring M home." "Maybe," Daniel said, his voice barely a whisper. "But I've been in this man's army long enough to know that sometimes a good commander doesn't let a little thing like death stop him from looking after his boys. War is a place of cold facts and hard steel. It is a place governed by physics and probability. But every now and then, the battlefield remembers the people who fought there. Sometimes, the machines we build carry the spirit and the will of the people who commanded them long after their hearts have stopped beating." That night, a dead commander gave orders to his soldiers one last time. And whether it was a ghost in the machine or a miracle of timing, those orders saved every single one of them. Because in the end, A soldier's duty doesn't always end when the breathing stops. Sometimes the frequency stays open just long enough to say goodbye.